Members, I call this meeting of the House Education Policy Committee to order. Please take your seats. We have a quorum present, so we can go on to the minutes, and I believe there is a technical correction on the second page, or within where how we're listing the amendments. We're just going to take out the HF and the dashes so that it looks similar to other minutes that have been going through, even though there was a lot of minutes from last year that we patterned it off of that did have it listed that way, but we'll fix that. Otherwise, has anybody had a chance to look at the minutes besides research staff that would like to move them? Representative Barr.
Madam Chair, move approval of the minutes of February 25th meeting.
Thank you. Representative Barr moves the minutes for approval for the Monday, February 25th meeting. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion prevails and the minutes for the Monday, February 25th meeting are approved. Folks, we have a kind of full agenda, and I want to be able to give Representative Urdahl some time on the last bill that he has, because it's very important to him. So we are going to move in right ahead to Representative Morrison's bill, House File 1343. Would you like to come up to the testifiers table? Welcome, Representative Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Would Representative Moeller, would you like to move House File 1343 so it is before us? Oh, sorry. I'm so used to her sitting right there. Sorry. Representative Kunesh-Podein, would you like to move Representative Moeller's bill, please? Representative Morrison's bill.
Madam Chair, yes, I would like to move House File 1343 for possible inclusion.
Thank you. Yes, sorry. Clearly the chair needs more coffee today. So thank you. Representative Kunesh-Podein has moved House File 1343 for possible inclusion in our omnibus bill. Representative Morrison, will you state your name for the record and please proceed with your testimony?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And for the record, I am often confused with Representative Moeller, and I take it as a compliment. Representative Kelly Morrison, Morrison. I'm here to present House File 1343. Which simply allows a school district to allow students to possess and apply topical sunscreen on school property or at a school-sponsored event without a note from a doctor. This does not mandate that school personnel help the child apply the sunscreen or provide the sunscreen. And I have two dermatologists here to testify on this bill's behalf. Dr. Linda Calls and Dr. Kristen Hook, if I may call them to the testifiers table.
Thank you, Representative Morrison. Yes, please bring up your testifiers. If they can be brief, that'd be great.
Thank you.
And as you come to the table, when you approach, just state your name for the record and your title, and then proceed.
My name is Kristen Hook, Dr. Kristen Hook from the University of Minnesota. I'm Associate Professor and Division Director of the Pediatric Dermatology Division. I'm going to say yours.
Yes, thank you. Who's going to speak first?
Me.
Go ahead and just proceed, and then we'll do the introductions for the next testifier.
All right. Madam Chair and committee members, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Dr. Calls and I are here on behalf of the Minnesota Dermatology Society to advocate for House File 1343 to remove barriers preventing the regular use of sunscreen in schools. Sunscreens are safe. They are not medicinal products. There is no systemic absorption. However, they are still currently regulated as an over-the-counter drug under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, and thus can require a physician note to be able for students to apply it in schools. This is important because Minnesota has the highest melanoma rates in the Midwest. We know that the regular use of sunscreen at a young age is a critical component of skin cancer prevention and can significantly reduce lifetime risk of developing skin cancer. This is especially important for our children who spend so much of their childhood hours and thus incur most of their sun exposure at school. They need to be protected there as well. This is in the best public interest to allow schools to set policies that will allow students to possess and apply sunscreen at school. We need to follow the example of 18 other states who have already passed legislation to remove barriers to possess sunscreen and allow proper sun protection during school hours. This legislation is currently active in 9 other states, in addition to Minnesota. So we ask that 1343 be passed by the House Education Policy Committee for full consideration by the Minnesota House.
Thank you, Dr. Hook. And next testifier, please state your name for the record and proceed.
Hi, my name is Linda Calls, and thank you.
Yes.
I just want to summarize that currently federal policy lumps sunscreen with over-the-counter drugs, and that gives schools confusing policy whether or not to require a doctor's signature or permission to be able to have these products at school. And many school districts across the state require that sunscreens do have a doctor's note. That creates really burdensome paperwork for physicians, parents, and schools to just simply apply sunscreen in school. So this bill would reduce these unneeded permission slips and remove barriers for children to protect themselves from the sun. We feel like it's a really simple policy proposal, and we support it wholeheartedly. We also have the support of the American Society for Dermatologic Surgery and the Minnesota Derm Society as well.
Thank you, Dr. Coles. I was wondering where that other microphone ended up. I think before I let Representative Morrison have the final say, would you mind if we go right to questions and see if people at the table have questions? So any member questions? Representative Wozniak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm wondering if either of you or perhaps Representative Morrison could speak to liability of schools in terms of making sure that if it's not requiring staff to apply it, but if there's any concern there about parents coming after teachers or staff for their kid getting sunburned because they didn't apply sunscreen.
Would either the doctors like to, or Representative Morrison, anyone?
So the,
Dr. Hook?
can you hear me okay? The parents would be able to select which sunscreen they wanted to send with their children, and so currently that is one of the concerns that nurses feel liable to apply it. But under this bill, it doesn't necessarily require that the nurse applies it, just that the student be allowed to bring it to school and even apply it themselves.
Representative Wozniak, have a follow-up? That's good. Representative Erickson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Doctor, has anyone approached the feds to see if the law could be unconfused?
Dr. Hook?
So as part of the American Academy of Dermatology Association, which is the federal legislative branch of the American Academy of Dermatology, it has been a yearly task to advocate for allowing sun protection to not be regulated under this act. The federal government has decided it's a state issue, and so I don't think that there's any plan for a federal change at this time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I understand.
Thank you. Representative Sandell?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wonder if schools are required to inform teachers or coaches about the issues of liability. I did coach tennis and lacrosse for a number of years, and was never informed that there might be a prohibition of using sunscreen.
I think that it varies, Madam Chair. I think that it varies according to school district and whether it's private or public, how strictly this is enforced. As a pediatric dermatologist, I can just tell you that I get many, many requests for school notes for students to be able to apply sunscreen, so I do know that many schools are enforcing the act as it is.
Representative Wozniak?
Can we just have, is it possible to get the mics turned up? I'm having trouble hearing
Okay.
them, and I
And
imagine
I think
other
you
folks
have to
might be
kinda
too.
Get
Lean
really
forward.
close, too.
Sorry.
Thank you. Any other questions? Representative Bennett?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question, because the application of this might look a little different, and that, no pun intended, in high school, say, or the upper grades versus elementary school. And I taught first grade for many years, and I think one of the issues with school districts is that, not wanting over-the-counter drugs, which this is not a drug or anything, is not only for potential, say, overdose, but that kids share things frequently. So my question is it common for a child to have an allergy to sunscreen. Could that be an issue where a first grader shares with another first grader and that parent didn't want their child to have sunscreen on, or that child was allergic? Or I'm just trying to think of things with these younger kids, because I think it's a good idea. I actually let my students have sunscreen. Yeah, but anyway, not against our rules in our school, but, well, maybe it was, I don't know. But I still let them. Yeah.
The
but-
overall risk,
Dr. Hook?
Anyway,
Madam Chair and members, the overall risk is extremely low, and there are nice large reviews published now that have documented the two most common components of sun protection in pediatric sunscreens are titanium and zinc, and neither of these are associated with any contact allergy or any skin-related allergic reactions to date. Historically, there were some reported reactions, but those components have largely been removed from sunscreens at this time.
Thank you. I think we got room for one more question. Representative Hewitt.
Just real quick, Madam Chair. Doctor, you have a pretty big patient base being from the university. You have quite a few. How many reactions have you seen to sunscreen over the years of your practice?
Dr. Hook?
I have had one and I have 4,000 to 5,000 patients per year.
That's a pretty big base, pretty rare.
And I've been there for 10 years. Have you
And
had
Dr.
any, Dr.
Culls?
Madam Chair, members, I have probably 6,000 patients right now, and I have never seen a pediatric reaction to sunscreen.
Thank you.
The sunscreen formulations have changed considerably over the past 15, 20 years that I've been practicing, and they are getting better and better.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And Representative Morrison, would you like a final word?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This seems like a really straightforward, common sense thing, and I encourage a yes vote. Thank you, committee.
Thank you. I renew the motion to lay House File 1343 over for inclusion in the omnibus bill. Representative Freiberg, you're up next. It's nice to see so many people were interested in sunscreen, though, because it's good for you. All right, Representative Freiberg, would you like to state your name for the record and proceed?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Mike Freiberg, State Representative. I'm here to present House File 1026. This bill would extend the life of the School Safety Technical Assistance Center and the School Safety Technical Assistance Council. A few years ago, we passed a law to create these. They had a sunset provision in them. This bill would just remove those sunset provisions. The problem of bullying has not gone away, so I think the work of these, both the center and the council, is as important as ever. So I think this is a good bill. I know Caitlin from the Department of Education is here to answer if there are any technical questions. I believe Jesus Lucero might be here from out front, Minnesota, to speak in favor of the bill, but that's really all I need to say.
Thank you, Representative Freiberg. One more housekeeping thing that I forgot. Representative Kunesh-Podein, would you like to move the bill before our committee?
I so move.
Thank you, Representative Kunesh-Podein has moved House File House File 1026 in front of us for consideration. And Representative Freiberg, you mentioned you have somebody to testify? Or no?
Mr. Lucero? Okay, they don't appear to be here. Sounds like you have a busy agenda, so out of respect for your time, I do know there is staff from the Department of Education, though.
In case there's detailed questions?
Yes, in case there's
Wonderful.
specific questions.
So do we have anybody at the table for a question? Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Freiberg, do we have any data on the successes or not successes of this program that has now been in existence through the center?
Representative Freiberg.
That sounds like a great question for the representative from the Department of Education.
As I see Ms. Caitlin Snyder moving to the table, please state your name for the record and enlighten us.
Madam Chair, Caitlin Snyder, Minnesota Department of Education. Thank you. As far as data that we have on the School Safety and Technical Assistance Center, when this bill was presented in front of Representative Freiberg's committee, one of the questions that he received was the number of school districts and charters across the state that have received support from this Technical Assistance Center. So we have that information readily available and can send it to the committee. Some 200 school districts, 50-some charters, every co-op and intermediate has received support from the Safety and Technical Assistance Center.
Wonderful, thank you.
Chair?
Representative Erickson, follow up, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Ms. Snyder, to what extent is the toolkit used as guidance? Does the department keep track of that as well? Will that be in the data that you provide for us?
Ms. Snyder.
Madam Chair, Representative Erickson, I am not sure that I can speak to that. As members may be aware, the toolkit was voluntarily provided to school districts and is on a voluntary basis. I can ask if we have information about how many school districts are currently implementing the toolkit. I'm not positive that we would have that information, but I can circle back with the committee on that.
Representative Erickson, follow up.
And one final question, and maybe you can't answer this, Ms. Snyder. Thank you, Madam Chair. Do we know if bullying has decreased or increased? I think when Mr. Adosh sent out his last report on school fighting, violence actually, fighting was probably ranked pretty high, but it seems to me bullying was also noted as a disruptive factor. So do you know if that's decreased as a result of our work of a few years ago?
Ms. Snyder.
Madam Chair and Representative Erickson, the level of bullying that is reported to the department remains fairly high, and there's a question as to, is bullying increasing, or are we just getting more reports of what's been happening in the field due to the work of the Technical Assistance Center? You were correct that I was not going to be able to answer this question, but I can speak with staff and see if we have a good answer to whether more data is being reported to us or we think that there are increases in the field.
Thank you,
Madam Chair.
Representative Erickson.
Thank you,
One more
Madam Chair.
follow-up?
Just one last statement, and thank you, Ms. Snyder. I think many of us received an email from Spirit Walker, 2004 email about the bullying law, and I hope that we're all reading it because I know this happened some time ago, but it's still something that we need to pay attention to. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Gruenhagen.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Freiberg, and, this was a pretty controversial bill when it was passed. I think, were you here when they?
I was.
Yeah, okay. I think we went most of the night on this.
We did.
But I was emailed a training module from the Minnesota Department of Education and also from the School Safety Technical Assistance Center. And in that module, it's again a training on the toolkit. It has curriculum for elementary children that tells elementary children, it's called the gender unicorn, they have to decide whether they're female, male, or they're other intersex. They also have to see if they're physically, again, elementary children down to the kindergarten level, they have to decide if they're physically attracted at an elementary level to men, women, or other genders. They have to decide if they're emotionally attracted to men, women, or other genders. That's just a small sample of what I find to be a very perverted training module put out by MDE and also the SSACT center. I'm not sure why we should reward a center that puts out this type of sewage into our educational system with more money. Can you give me a reason why?
Representative Gruenhagen, let's try to keep the intense words down. We're just talking about expanding a sunset, but I'll allow Representative Freiberg or Ms. Snyder, whoever would like to answer that.
Yeah, I think Ms. Snyder may have some clarification.
Madam Chair and Representative Gruenhagen, I apologize that I'm not more familiar with what you're referring to. I do know that in general, the department is prohibited from advancing any sort of curriculum or model curriculum. So I would think that would be out of the scope of what this the technical center does, but I'm not aware of what you're looking at this moment, so I'm not sure if I can respond to that fully.
Representative Gruenhagen.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I can email you a copy. It has the MDE name and also the center's initials on there, along with phone number and contact. So it came right from them. And I'm not sure we want to give more money to a center that does this to our children. Thank you, Madam.
Ms. Snyder.
My understanding of the bill is that there is no funding attached to it.
Representative Freiberg, would you like to answer that?
That's my understanding as well.
Funding.
Funding, yes.
Yes. Thank you, Representative Freiberg. The bill just simply removes the sunset date, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Representative Baker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To Representative Freiberg, again, you were here at the time when this came through. I was not. I remember hearing about this before I was in the legislature. And I guess what I have come to, appreciate about a sunset is that there was probably a really good reason to have it in at the time. So maybe my question might be to you is, was it the intent, do you think, or do you know this, or maybe others know this too, that it was meant to sort of like, let's let this thing sunset. If the school districts want to do their own gig, let them carry on. Let's get out of the way. And that to me kind of seems like it would appease both sides. So why are we retracting that now? And do you recall why that was agreed to back then to have a sunset on such an important issue like bullying? So can you give me some light on that? I'm disappointed that we have to extend this when it was actually really agreed upon late nights to say this is probably a better bill because it's got a sunset in it. So that's what I'm trying to dive into.
Representative Freiberg.
Thank you, Representative Baker, Chair Joachim. I wasn't the chief author of the bill. It was a much larger bill, and the center and the council were just one component of it. I know Ms. Snyder has some specific information.
Ms. Snyder.
Madam Chair and Representative Baker, this is an instance when Minnesota was slightly ahead of the curve compared to our federal counterparts. So when this legislation was passed with the sunset, this was ahead of the most recent federal reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Schools Act, which does include language that any school district that receives federal dollars have a system in place to prevent bullying and harassment. So there's an increased focus and requirement from the federal government that our schools be providing these services.
Thank you, Ms. Snyder. Representative Baker, follow-up?
Thank you.
Any other questions at the table? Representative Scott.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And I believe that everyone on this committee received an email from Dana Markusich. And she wrote, and I just want to put this on the record, but she wrote to us in 2015 and 16, her 8th grade daughter had a traumatic experience where a male student was undressing, standing next to her in the girls' locker room. And of course, this shook her up. There were community meetings about it. And this mom tells the story in this email to all of us that we were point blank told that if we did not agree with having a biological male using a girls' locker room with our daughters, we could always homeschool. And this mom reports that her daughter, or that she, the mom, felt threatened and bullied, and her child basically said, well, if you don't like it, just, leave. And so I would like to know how the safe and supportive schools, and I'm assuming this woman probably did take her children out, or take her child out of her. We don't know that by this email, but it says, I knew my daughter was not in a safe place as long as she remained enrolled in that school. And why would she have to endure that invasion of privacy? So what is in situations like this, what is the technical assistance council center, what are they doing to protect, girls like that are in this situation? If you act on behalf of this girl, the male that was undressing in front of the girls may feel like he was being bullied, but in this case, she felt like she was being bullied. And so how does the center resolve that? What's your answer?
Representative Freiberg or Ms. Snyder, would you like to I hate to relitigate a bill that's passed years ago, and I do appreciate the conversation because we're removing a sunset date, but maybe some clarification on what the center's responsibilities are and what they do would be helpful.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I'm not on the committee. I have not seen this email. I know this bill certainly doesn't go into the whole issue of bathrooms, but maybe
Yes,
Ms.
and
Snyder could
I do
speak
appreciate
in general
Representative-
about how the center responds to concerns raised by school districts.
Thank you, Ms. Snyder.
Madam Chair and Representative Scott, the School Safety and Technical Assistance Center has provided resources that are short-named as a toolkit for school districts that are trying to navigate this space that's new for many of our school districts in the state. So the resources and toolkit that are on a voluntary basis for school districts does provide a number of different options for school districts on how you navigate the locker room or bathroom conversation. That can be unisex bathrooms, that can be other that this is a voluntary toolkit that is accessible to school districts that was provided because of the number of school districts that were asking for assistance from the department on navigating what can be a really tricky topic for families.
Representative Scott, follow up.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm just wondering, I've lost my train of thought. Well, let me ask you this. I saw in the, I believe it's the paper yesterday, or online version of the paper, that an Hennepin Schools is being sued by the ACLU for a transgender student that was on the boys' swim team that was being allowed to be in that locker room with the boys, and then on one occasion was asked not to do that anymore. And so that students' parents are suing the school district. And so I'm wondering if this is an effective program, why are we still hearing about cases like this if it's justifiable and we should not sunset this?
Representative Scott, I would hope that parents would always have access to the courts, but I'll maybe let Ms. Snyder answer that.
Madam Chair and Representative Scott, I'm afraid that I can't comment on whether or not Anoka Hennepin has been using resources from the School Safety and Technical Assistance Center, if they're working with guidance from the toolkit. I do know that part of the reason why the department has been asked to provide this toolkit is because there is a concern of meeting the constitutional requirements of an education for a student, regardless of what their experience is.
One more follow-up, and then we're going to really
Thank you, Madam
stick
Chair. I
to the
remember what my
substance
other
of the
question
bill.
was.
Thank you.
Yep, I remember what my other question was. And in regards to the toolkit, and as I recall, the toolkit, if we go back to this email that I was referring to, where this girl was being forced to stand next to a boy in her locker room that was undressing, if I remember correctly, the direction in the toolkit for instances like that was that you had to allow a student who identified with their non-biological sex to do exactly this. And so for that reason, I do remember that distinctly from the toolkit. And if members would like, I can certainly get the citation for that, the page and everything. But for that reason, I can't, for the life of me, figure out why we would want to go ahead and keep this thing non-sunsetted, to move forward with moving the sunset into the future.
Ms. Snyder, did you have an answer? Or Representative Freiberg?
I guess I would just say, Ms. Snyder said a couple times the toolkit's voluntary to school districts and doesn't require any specific action.
Yeah.
And it,
Ms. Snyder.
the School Safety and Technical Assistance Center is a vital part of our ESSA plan in providing these supports to our school districts across the state. They need to have this support either in their school districts or at the department, and we can see from the data the number of school districts and charters, intermediates, and co-ops that are accessing us that there is an interest in getting the support from the SSTAC.
So thank you. I think we have room for one more question. Representative Sandell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wonder, is there an author that assumes the responsibility for the toolkit that's been referred to here?
Ms. Snyder?
I would have to talk with the School Safety and Technical Assistance Center. I believe it was from a working group, is my recollection, versus a single author.
Thank you. Follow-up, Representative Sandell.
So we don't really know who it is who wrote the, or presented the toolkit?
Ms. Snyder.
Ultimately, everything is at the discretion of the School Safety and Technical Assistance Center, the Minnesota Department of Education, and our administration.
So Ms. Snyder, let's do this. Let's have you get us the information on the schools that are utilizing this. I know there was a question asked about the percentage of bullying, if it's going up or down. It might be nice to have the link to the toolkit so members could look at that if they so choose. And just want to bring us back home, and maybe I can just, as the chair, I'll ask one question once again, just to clarify. Having a center like this helps us get our money having a center like this is what's required now under ESSA. Is that correct, Ms. Snyder?
The requirement is on the school districts providing these services.
Thank you.
If it's not provided by the department, it's a local mandate.
So, Ms. Snyder, if we do not expand this and continue the sunset, even if we ended up looking at language, and I would entertain, and maybe Representative Freiberg were putting a sunset back in, but further out, this would be a huge unfunded mandate on our schools.
Correct.
Thank you. Representative Freiberg, I renew my motion to lay 1026 over for possible inclusion in the omnibus bill. Thank you. Now, we have next, thank you. House File 1111, Representative Hassan, would you like to proceed to the testifiers table? Representative Hassan, would you like to move your bill in front of the committee?
Madam Chair, I move House File 1111 for possible inclusion.
Thank you. Would you like to continue? Representative Hassan moves her bill for possible inclusion in the omnibus bill. Would you like to continue with your testimony, please?
Yes, Madam Chair and members of the committee, House File 1111 is a technical fix to reinstate post-secondary education option eligibility for Summit Academy and American Indian OIC, who were made ineligible as a PSE provider. PSE providers when Minnesota Department of Education reviewed the statutes last year. It deletes the reference to the North Central Association of Colleges and Schools, which no longer exists. This bill reinstates the PSEO for just the OICs as they continue to resume their PSEO programs. The language was developed and agreed upon with the Minnesota Department of Education last session and was included in the Education Omnibus Bill. And I have two testifiers here that will just tell us more about the Summit Academy.
Thank you. Could you please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony?
Thanks, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Leroy West. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer at Summit Academy. Thank you for allowing us the opportunity to be able to testify here today. Summit Academy has been accredited since 1984 by North Central Association of Colleges since 1984. And up until 5 years ago, North Central Association decided that they were not going to accredit post-secondary schools any longer, which over 400 schools across the country were then sent to go find additional accrediting agencies to accredit themselves. So Summit, about 4 years ago, we moved to become accredited through COE, Council of Occupation of Education, out of Atlanta, which would then allow us to continue our Title IV eligibility going forward. That also enable us to participate in the PSEO as well through Minnesota Department of Education. And this bill basically, more or less would just change the language now from being accredited, which the bill stated through North Central Association of Colleges now move over to Council of Occupation of Education, which would then allow us to continue to have PSEO students to attend Summit Academy so that they could take some skill training so as a junior and senior as they move forward in some career technical programs.
And then it looks like you have another testifier. Do you want to state your name for the record and proceed?
Madam Chair, my name is Anna Marie Kuiper. I'm the Director of Strategic Development at Summit Academy OIC.
Go ahead.
I just want to reiterate what Leroy West has shared. Summit Academy is a career and technical education institution located in North Minneapolis. We are an accredited institution, accredited by the Council of Occupational Education. We are a training center specializing in healthcare, construction, and IT. We're an excellent opportunity for high school students to take advantage of the training and our extended employer networks that we have built. And I encourage that this becomes included in the bill.
Thank you. Any final words, Representative Hassan, and then I'll open it up for questions.
I just want to highlight that Summit Academy is launching a new teen tech center this summer. And this PSEO will be serving students enrolled in these programs. And in the past, they have historically had PSEO for construction and health programs, healthcare programs. And it's important to the work that Summit Academy is doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Any questions at the table? Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I have visited this facility several times and indeed invited the U.S. Department of Education to visit, which an Assistant Secretary of Education did. And I spoke with Secretary DeVos when I visited her not too long ago, and they're so impressed. And my question, Ms. Kuiper, is how soon do you need this accreditation, this change? Because I believe you have a cohort that's ready to begin PSEO courses. Or maybe, sir, you want to answer that?
Yeah. Madam Chair, Representative Erickson, if we can have it by the fall, which would be great, because our cohort that's starting our fall program, having this language changed by then really helps us out in terms of having a lot of the high school seniors, who are juniors this year, who would be moving into seniors next year, to be able to have that opportunity. It's too late for this year to get somebody in high school who's doing it, but having those right now who are, we can kind of pitch the program to now, and as they're moving into our next school year will be ideal.
Thank you, Mr. West. Representative Erickson.
So, Madam Chair, I was just concerned that it doesn't get lost in the omnibus bill, and was probably going to recommend that we send it to the General Register. However, perhaps if it doesn't get lost and there's no veto or there's none of that other silly stuff that went on last year, we can make it, because this was included last year. I was the chief author, so I know all about it and have visited with Dr. King many times. So this is really important, and we have to include this and make sure it becomes law, because if it doesn't, it should go to the General Register today.
Thank you, Representative Erickson. Any other questions or final words? Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Great, thanks.
And I renew my motion to move House File 11, lay over House File 1111, and I promise we will not have it get lost. All right. So next up, we have Representative Hers, House File 847. Rep. Her, would you like to move your bill before the committee?
Yes, Madam Chair. I'd like to move House File 847 to be laid over for possible inclusion in the Education Policy Omnibus Bill.
Thank you, Representative Her. Would you like to, now that the bill's before us, would you like to start your testimony and then bring up your testifiers?
I would. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair, committee members. The bill before you is House File 847 relating to requiring personal finance for high school graduation. I'd like to start by asking all of you on the committee this question. Would you rather have $2,000 now, or cash, or a penny that doubles in value every day, and why? I'm going to pause for a second just to let you think about that. As you're thinking about all the expenses that you have and all the things that you need to pay for, right? And I won't ask anybody to say this out loud. So due to compound interest, a penny that doubles in value every day would be worth $10 million only after 1 month. Most people, though, when given the choice, will take the $2,000. Why? Because they don't understand basic finance, which leads them to making poor personal financial decisions. This topic has generated different discussions about what classes should be required, what it means for students who have to take classes and they don't like them and enjoy them, so it impacts their learning, or along with the costs for adding one more additional required class, an unfunded mandate. I understand these concerns. I worked for the school district. I heard from educators, and I heard from families and students. I really do understand this. But my heart and my experience tells me that this issue goes beyond individual choices, likes and dislikes, or costs. Personal finance is important not just because this is the one topic that will impact every single person. It is a tool that everyone, whether they like it or enjoy it or not, regardless of gender, race, culture, religion, class, or creed, will need in their lifetime. But it is also a social justice tool to address one of America's most pervasive problems, poverty. In America, we have built a nation of wealth on the backs of the poor, which disproportionately are people of color. This was done through commoditizing land stolen from our indigenous and native communities, wealth generation through slave labor, and exploitation of Chinese labor to increase wealth through expansion of the transcontinental railroad. Systemic exclusion of people of color, especially those of African American descent, from owning assets and transferring it intergenerationally, has been one of the biggest contributors of systemic poverty. It is well documented in scholarly research that government policies including the Homestead Act, the Chinese Exclusion Act, and even Social Security Act were often designed to exclude people of color. For example, the GI Bill, which provided veterans financial support in the form of cash stipends for schooling, low-interest mortgage loans, job skills training, low-interest loans, and unemployment benefits were never seen by Black soldiers. As a result, they did not have access to assets to help build wealth that could be transferred to subsequent generations to build upon. Pair this type of exclusion with the current financial situation we are all facing, and we will not only see poverty exacerbated in our poorest communities and communities of color, but also in our newest workforce group, our millennials. The only way to address this is to equip students today with the resources and tools for managing personal finance. With school loan debt at epic proportions, housing costs skyrocketing, widening income gap between the rich and the poor, systems switching from retirement plans from institutional responsibility to individual responsibilities, the high cost of healthcare and high deductible plans, predatory financial products, just to name a few, more and more people will struggle to achieve financial stability. To speak more on this topic, I have 4 testifiers here today, and with your permission, Madam Chair, I would like to call up Lincoln Hughes of EverFi, they provide free financial education curriculum for use in K-12 settings.
Thank you. Just have your testifier come forward, state their name for the record, and proceed. Just a few minutes each would be great. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. My name is Lincoln Hughes. Again, I'm with EverFi, and previously I was a teacher in North Minneapolis. My education career started before I was born. I'm a 4th-generation teacher. My great-grandma was the first woman to graduate from Bemidji State Teachers College, as it was known at the time. And when I joined my family in our family business of teaching, I decided to start it in Minneapolis. And on my route to school every day, there was 16 payday loan shops that I would pass. I would go from northeast and kind of wind through north to my school, and I would go past all these payday loan shops and predatory lending practices. And it got me really passionate about the issue, and I was teaching my middle school social studies students about economics, about local government, about national ideas. And it got me really passionate about the topic of financial literacy and personal finance. So I joined EverFi. At the time, it was a company of about 40 people, and now we have over 550 employees across North America. And we teach financial literacy in about 25,000 classrooms every year, reaching about 2 million students. And what we see and what our data shows us across the nation is states that require or have some sort of mandate around financial education has better student outcomes around the topic. So it might be things around college loan debt, it might be things about emergency savings. And in my travel, my Prius and I driving around the state of Minnesota, whether it be Minnewaska High School, whether it be Litchfield, Eden Valley Watkins, St. Paul, where my friends today are from, we see a really strong appetite for personal finance. It's, the way and how it's done is always a little bit different, but there's a large demand for financial literacy across the state, whether it be the district, large or small. And a lot of it has to do with, because we want all of our kids to be on the same playing field and make sure they have the opportunity that I've had without the mistakes that I made. So I think that was 2 minutes, but I'll give up the rest of my time to the next.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hughes. Next testifier.
Next, I'd like to call up Mike Solomon, Treasurer of the City of St. Paul, and Ikram Kaliso from the City of St. Paul to speak to the city's work on financial empowerment and their two-gen approach.
Thank you. Just go ahead. Whoever wants to speak first, state your name for the record and begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Mike Solomon. I'm the Treasurer for the City of St. Paul. The city supports financial education, including the personal finance credits that are proposed in this bill. I've been excited to work on the city's launching an Office of Financial Empowerment. The goal will be to connect residents with some of the tools, services, and other existing resources that'll tackle what becomes an equity issue in our community. some of the community benefits that we've seen from financial empowerment, financial education, include improved access to banking services in communities that are likely to use payday loans and those high interest rates, address some fair housing disparities in our community, increase savings for both college and retirement, and we're seeing more eligible filers that can take advantage of tax credits and rebates. So overall, we're excited to launch that in St. Paul, and we think it's important to have this education in high school as well. We're seeing many college students that do not graduate with any basic financial skills, and so we're excited to see that personal financial education come into place through the high schools and also through our city office.
Thank you, Mr. Solomon. Next testifier, just state your name for the record and proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Akram Kaliso, and I'm a policy associate in the mayor's office at the city of St. Paul. And this is an issue that is personally important to me because I was one of those kids. I was a first-generation college student, but really having no understanding of personal finance, went through college, graduated, and then had no idea how to build credit, or like that, oh, I could have been building credit this whole time. It doesn't start when I start working. And so, you know, those are things that we have to catch up on after we graduate college. And I just think about, you know, the opportunity to get the education beforehand, all the years that I personally and a lot of other young people miss out on. But from the city's perspective, the city of St. Paul believes that everyone should have the opportunity to learn and grow. This includes providing quality learning opportunities such as financial education for all people of all ages in our community. We identified that financial insecurity and inequities in educational attainment by race, ethnicity, and income limit our residents' access to opportunities. So, for example, 22% of the city's households have zero or negative net worth, and 32% of households of color have incomes below the federal poverty level. Children growing up in St. Paul, and particularly children of color, face significant challenges given the high level of financial insecurity and educational disparities that we have. And over the course of the past year at the city, we've been researching and analyzing national models of offices of financial empowerment and college savings accounts programs as a strategy to address our financial insecurity and educational opportunity gaps. So we did a lot of community engagement sessions, and what we learned from parents was that, you know, they said this program is great and we know that it's going to make a big impact on our families, but it would be great to complement that with having financial education within the school curriculum. So that's something that we heard over and over again. And just generally, we anticipate that our new Office of Financial Empowerment will elevate awareness of financial health resources and play a crucial role in developing an understanding of where there are gaps in services to help us meet the needs of our residents. Providing financial education and connection to financial resources in our school system will help unlock opportunities for young people to have access to not just the education, but the actual products that exist out there. And overall, you know, the city supports a multi-generational approach to educational attainment and wealth building to help families accumulate social capital and upward mobility. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Caliso. And Representative Hurd, do you want to say a few more words before I open it up to questions? And I think there's two more testifiers to testify as well.
I actually have one more person from the nonprofit sector, but if we're running out of short of time, I can just skip that and close it out.
If it could be very, very brief.
So I'd like to call up Sarun, and she's a community engagement consultant.
Please state your name for the record and proceed.
I got too excited. Hello, my name is Saruan Im, and I'm a community engagement specialist, and I used to work for Prepare and Prosper. And Prepare and Prosper is an nonprofit organizations that provide free services, free tax services to low-income families, and they also provide coaching, personal finance coaching, and mentoring. And I really believe that this is very important. I grew up being an interpreter for my parents who didn't speak very little English, and I remember going to the bank and not knowing the difference between fixed interest rates and variable interest rates, and what is that impact in the long term of my parents' mortgage rate. And being in high school, what did I know about that? And I didn't have any critical analysis practice around how to think about that. And so when I worked at Prepare and Prosper, a lot of people came and wanted to buy homes, wanted to fix their credit scores. And credit scores, you all know, is a huge barrier to accessing financial loans to get that house that they want, or education. And so financial education. And I truly believe that, and just imagine, when was the first time that you learned about your credit score? Who helped you along those process? And it would be just and fair if everybody had the same access to understand how their credit score affects their future financial health. And just financial health is really important to me, because just like how we have FIED educational to have good health, and just like we have driver's ed, so that we ensure that there's people who drive safely on the roads. Having financial education gives us that critical analysis tool to make future better decisions for us, and that it sets students up for success as well as future consumers, and that will feed and that they will feel confident in making and accessing all the financial tools, such as student loans, home mortgages, and capital to start new businesses. And that all contributes to economic growth as well as prosperity for our state.
Thank you, Ms. Iam. I think I will have the other two testifiers come up that have signed up, and then we'll move to questions. So I believe we have Roger Aronson signed up to testify, and then Mr. Scott Grunquist. Please state your name for the record and proceed.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members. My name is Roger Aronson. I represent the Secondary School Principals Association. We're here to talk about some concerns that we have with 847. For years, we've adopted the position of defending those 7 elective credits that are in the graduation requirements that are at the end of this bill. We have repelled several attempts at breaking into mandatory provisions in there. I think the most recent one was FIED. I think Representative Erickson remembers that. And when we had the presentations on FIED, they're very compelling that kids should get exercise. All of the testimony that you just heard was very compelling, whether it was, and I was making a note relative to payday loans, housing, tax credits, retirement savings, mortgages, et cetera. We do think, though, allowing school districts to give the option of electives and then allowing parents to select which electives they want their children to take is the best way to go on this. One of the significant problems that we have, I mean, it's a great problem, but for a lot of our high school students, their schedules are completely full. And I know this is prospective in terms of who it's going to impact, but you're going to say, by taking this mandated course, there are some electives then that some students will not be taking. And typically, those are at the high end. Those are high-end language, they're high-end math, and we don't think that's the right way to go. And I know Mr. Grunquist will discuss this a bit too. We do believe there are elements of personal finance that are already embedded in the graduation standards as well. There seems to be a conflict, and Representative Erickson has them right here. And there's a little bit of a conflict, you know, of what's important and what shouldn't be important. Obviously, we think everything is important. People that have their own issues, sometimes we want a separate class. You're going to hear another bill about that later today. You know, here it's a credit, et cetera. So we, and one last piece on this, and that's that an individual school district, if the parents in that district want, and the board wanted to have this as a local graduation requirement, they can do that. There's no impediment to doing that. And sometimes people come here to get you to do a broad-based requirement for everyone instead of going back to the local school board and saying, let's discuss this here. Maybe this is important. And maybe you'd have a community that, you know, it might be a farm economic credit that might be more important, you know, than just the general finance credit. So I think we're really sympathetic to all of the issues that were raised in the testimony. But we really would like you to exercise caution before you invade that 7 elective credits that are in the graduation requirements.
Mr. Grunquist, state your name for the record and proceed, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. My name is Scott Grunquist with the Association of Metropolitan School Districts. And Mr. Arnson really covered actually pretty much what I was going to cover, but let me just reiterate that the 7 electives are really something that not only students, but I think parents and counselors and staff try to protect. Mr. Arnson mentioned that that is generally where the students are going to get those high-end courses, and that includes those college credits, the AP courses that students can get, which of course, as you all know, helps save on your college costs then, and many students are able to bring college credits into post-secondary because they are able to attain those in high school. And you would see less of an opportunity to do that when you lower the number of electives. And so while we also agree that Representative Herr raised some very compelling and really important issues to think about, we think a better way to approach it might be if we don't feel like the standards currently are addressing the needs, that we would direct the commissioner then in the next round of standards reviews to beef up the standards in this area to make sure it's addressing what our students need to know. So with that, I'll stop. Thank you, Madam Chair and members.
Representative Herr, final comments, then I'll open it up to questions.
Yes, I do have some final comment. And just to address the fact that I am aware that in social studies class, there is one unit in it that does provide finance, but that's one unit to address the entire scope of how big this is. And I want to remind everyone that, again, this is the one topic that whether you like it or not, enjoy it or not, or feel it is important or not, everybody will have to use this tool in their life. And so I just want to reiterate that I don't have to exercise in order to survive. I do have to know my finances in order to survive and thrive, right? So exercise is great. I'm all for it, but I just wanted to touch on those 2 points. So in closing, I just want to stress the importance of financial literacy. I have a trusted friend and educator who said to me that if I wanted to address systemic racism and a legacy is created, why not embed a race class into the curriculum instead of teaching personal finance? And I didn't have a response at the time because I agree that around his thought around race class is equally important. But after more consideration, I realized that teaching one class in systemic racism won't change a person's belief or action. Studies tell us that it actually takes a person 7 exposures before before it'll change their values or their thinking around race, right? But we have data that shows, and my testifiers didn't have a lot of time to go through this, but they have data that shows how many more kids save because they had exposure in high school, how many more kids understand what impacts their credit score and thus impacting their financial well-being later on. We actually have hard data already that shows us that personal finance tools do change behavior. And so whether it's hundreds of scholarly articles, the articles I had to pull from my own dissertation, or popular sources like Forbes magazine, they are all saying the same thing. The one way to address financial insecurity is to promote education. To quote the Forbes article from February 2018, they said, "We got into this mess largely because government policies encourage wealth building for white Americans to the detriment of communities of color. To fix it, we need policies that will help close the gap, so we should use our collective voice to support and elect those people that can put this type of policy reform in place. We are those policymakers, and HF 8747 is the policy needed to address systemic poverty along with financial insecurity that too many Minnesotans experience today." So to conclude, I want to leave you with one more homework assignment because there is a teacher inside of me as well. I want to leave you with one problem to solve, and that is, how much do you think a person who begins putting money away in their 401k plan at the age of 20 will have by the age of 65, assuming an annual raise of 3.5% a year and an 8.5% return? Ponder that question, and if you want the actual data, I'll give it to you, and then come back. If you want to know the answer, come back to me and we can talk about it.
Thank you.
And now I'll open it up to any questions that anybody might have for me.
I have Representative Erickson on the list.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I certainly support your desire for our students to understand personal finance. There's no question I do that. But teachers need to be educated in how to deliver this. And I think that's one reason that perhaps the standards in social studies that fall under personal finance, and by the way, members, we have benchmarks in grades 3, 5, 6, and 9 through 12. And we have, I showed this when Mr. Arnson was up there. We have this whole group. So teachers can spend an inordinate amount of time teaching personal finance if they understand how to do it. And I know that Representative Robbins has talked with someone with whom I visited a couple of years ago who can offer staff development in how a social studies teacher could address personal finance within the social studies courses that are offered within a high school or with any school district. So I think we need to think carefully about, it's fine to have personal finance, but we have to have the staff person who can teach that at the level you understand it, Representative Herr, because I know you have a great grasp on this. So I have a question for you, though. Would personal finance course, if it were offered, as your bill suggests, would that be aligned with the state standards in economics that focus on personal finance that meet these benchmarks? There are 4 major benchmarks in high school.
Representative Herr.
Madam Chair and Representative Erickson, thank you for the question. So I did look at that one unit in the economics requirement, and it would be an expansion on that because it is just one unit, and they do touch very briefly on some of these topics. And so it would be an expansion of that. And I understand that if it's a half-credit course, it would be a semester-long class. And so they would go into deeper content. And I just wanted to also address your concern around teaching, having the right staff to teach us. I agree with you. And I think that in that question itself, right, lies the problem, right? That if we as adults, we can't even talk to, because these things are not difficult theoretical concept, right? These are very simple concept that a lot of people who have done very well for themselves know, and that they actually hold that knowledge, and they don't need a teaching degree to do this. And I'm thinking, I know that teachers do have it, and I would rather they teach it. But the fact is that if we as adults can't even teach very personal, basic finance to people, that speaks to the issue of why we need to have this in our society. And many of you who have an education background understand, right, the education theory around reproduction of knowledge. If we continue to have the same 7 electives or that we have, we continue to have the same structure in which we teach, we will reproduce the exact same knowledge, which keeps us in a system in which we continue to have systemic racism, and we continue to have systemic poverty. And so that's, I think that does, I would like to have somebody who is an expert in being able to teach this, but I think that in that question in itself speaks to the problem we have in front of us.
So, Madam Chair, thank you, Madam Chair. We probably have several issues in front of us, but I don't think we should be separating out our students. I want all of our students to have access to these standards, and they are part of our social studies curriculum, or social studies standards, and the curriculum should support that. So my message is, schools, pay attention to this need, and I think Representative Herr has pointed it out very eloquently and very importantly how much we need this. But at the same time, we have local decision-making, and I honor that and want school districts to continue offering the electives that you've heard the testifiers, Mr. Arnson and Mr. Kronquist, talk about. So, I hope we can solve this dilemma, but I would say that some staff development for our teachers who teach social studies in the area of personal finance would be very valuable. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Erickson. Representative Mueller.
My question is answered.
Representative Kunesh-Podein, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative. I remember when I was in high school, I had to take a semester. It was called Living on Your Own. And it made an incredible difference in my life. It taught us, we had to use checkbooks back in the day then. It taught us how to use a checkbook, how to fill out an application, how to create a budget based on real-time expenses. Looking at what kind of a job we could get and then what kind of a place we could rent. And when I left my little town up north and came down to the Twin Cities, it had a profound difference on how I was able to take care of myself and support myself. And I feel like this is a really important part of our life education. And I think it's one that we could incorporate, and we should incorporate into our educational system. And it's not even hard, maybe we can begin at a younger age so that kids realize that putting that nickel away or putting that penny away will be how much by the time we're 65?
Well, if there's, well, that was 2 separate questions into one problem now, so we can solve that one another day.
Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you. Were there any other questions? Okay.
You're right, Representative Erickson.
I renew my motion to lay House File 847 over for inclusion in the omnibus bill. And I just want to personally thank you, Representative Herr, for bringing this forward. I know Hopkins, we have a half credit requirement in junior high and in high school. And it's taught by our business teacher or our math teachers, which I've always found it bizarre that it's in social studies because it wasn't when I was a kid either. But I just want to thank you for bringing this forward. And now we have the main attraction. We have Representative Urdahl's House File 249. And I know you're ready. And thank you for the treats I see coming down. Representative Urdahl, would you like to move your bill?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move this bill for possible inclusion in the omnibus bill.
And Representative Urdahl, I believe you have an author's amendment you'd like to offer.
Yes, I do. I'd like to offer the A3 amendment. Purposes is to avoid some redundancies where things are repeated, and at the suggestion of Mr. Aronson, to tighten up and clarify what's included in civic life, retaining some flexibility for school boards.
And Representative Urdahl, is that House Amendment 3?
A3.
A3. And just for clarification for members, A4 met the 24-hour deadline, and A2 that's in your packet met the 24-hour deadline. Representative Urdahl came and spoke to me on the floor yesterday about including A4, the language that you see before you in A4, but we just kind of combined it all into A3. So that's how A3 came about. So Representative Urdahl moves the A3 amendment. Do I hear any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, those who are, those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? The A3 amendment has been adopted. Now, Representative Urdahl, you have the bill in front of us, how you would like, the shape you would like it in. Would you like to please proceed?
Thank you very much. The National Assessment for Progress in Education reports that Minnesota students graduate at a 24% proficiency rate. This is a crisis. House File 249 provides for a class devoted to civics or credit taught to juniors or seniors. It would provide a consistent model across Minnesota. Now, when just to clarify, because I know that some are concerned, for credit means, on the record, that it could be any percentage of a credit. It's not one credit. It can be any percentage of an eighth, a quarter, a half. So I hope that those who needed to hear that understand it. This also requires that the aggregate scores of graduates who have taken the required civics test be reported, and places civics in the world's best workforce provision, providing for some experiential learning and basically learning by doing. Now, there just might be some questions and concerns about this. Let me explain. Some will say, we already have good standards for civics. Yeah, but are they all being taught? We can't verify this. Civics is taught in a variety of ways in Minnesota. Most civics courses are in the 9th grade. They aren't ready for it yet. It makes more sense to teach civics to students who are ready to become voters. Some schools have no designated civics. Some teach standards in social studies classes. Some teach as an elective, and some may not at all. We can't track how the standards for civics are being taught. Some say we're going to lose electives. Need a longer day. Well, you know, there are some schools out there that are already doing it the way that I'm suggesting, and they're not going to be affected at all. Others might have to reconfigure electives. Prioritize what is important. I taught, for example, before the regular school day. Where there's a will, there's a way to make it work. Some might say this takes away local control, but schools are already required to teach government and civics. This does leave flexibility to school districts as to the length of the class and the credit offered. Change is hard. We change all the time. Today isn't how civics was taught decades ago, when, by the way, they could do it the way I'm asking them to do it. We go through all kinds of education programs. STEM is important, but it comes at a cost to other disciplines. It comes down to this. What is important? Is it important that 3 of 4 graduate from our schools without knowing how our government works? There's a letter in your packet from District Judge Thompson I urge you to look at. I will conclude with a short message from a textbook. Remember that a Constitution which gives to the people so much freedom and entrusts them with so much power rests for its permanency on their knowledge and virtue. An ignorant people are easily betrayed, and a wicked people can never be ruled by the mild influence of their own laws. Those words are in a textbook from 1828. Those who oppose this either don't think civics is important or it's just working fine the way it is. And both of those assumptions are wrong. And now I have 5 testifiers, all requested to do it about 2 minutes each.
Yes, Representative Urdahl, because we have about 15, 20 minutes left in committee, so I want to make sure there's time
They
for
are well
questions.
drilled.
Wonderful. Please state your name for the record and proceed.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Lisa Larson, and I'm a member of the League of Women Voters. Before I retired, for many, many years, I served as counsel to this committee, so it's nice to be back. The League of Women Voters believes democracy depends on citizens who actively and effectively participate in government. The Minnesota League of Women Voters supports House File 249 for 3 reasons. Number 1, civics education is key to strengthening a democracy. The Founding Fathers saw education as the way to safeguard America's system of self-governance. Improving civics education should have nonpartisan support across the political spectrum. Strengthening American democracy is an interest we should all share in common. Number 2, there is a long-standing tension in schools between educating students to be skilled workers and educating students to be responsible citizens. School culture appears weighted more towards STEM education. The letter from the Chief Judge of the 8th Judicial District that Representative Urdahl just mentioned makes that very point. Schools themselves are not democratic institutions. Both goals, educating skilled workers and preparing responsible citizens, are important and must work in tandem. And 3, civic literacy is key to transforming students' knowledge into practice. Civics is not synonymous with history. Civics enables students to apply the knowledge and skill sets they learn in history to civic engagement. A high-quality civics education lets students experience democratic processes, participate in the civic life of their communities, and learn from their experiences. As other testimony will show, this bill is about sharply focusing the existing contours of civics education in Minnesota, already found in law and state standards and benchmarks, and about ensuring experiential learning is integral to students' formal civics coursework. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please state your name for the record and proceed.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Jennifer Bloom. I am the Executive Director of the Learning Law and Democracy Foundation. I have been involved with civic education for over 30 years. One of the programs that we can point to as being something that we're really proud of is the Minnesota High School Mock Trial Competition. When it got too big for our little operation, the State Bar Association took it on. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this afternoon. I support this bill because it focuses on the critical need for formal civics and government instruction and civic engagement opportunities that are necessary for students to become effective citizens. Specifically, I'm here to talk about the course for credit and civics test reporting requirements. By focusing exclusively on civics and government, the high school course requirement reduces the chances that civics instruction is watered down by integrating it into other social studies courses. We've seen this across the board as we've been implementing the standards that attempts to integrate, although we might love the idea, are difficult to accomplish. The Minnesota grades 9-12 social studies citizenship and government standards include 34 benchmarks, which describe the civics content and skills that students need to master. These benchmarks cannot be taught effectively as an add-on to other courses that have challenging benchmarks of their own. For example, geography in grades 9-12 has about 34. Econ, grades 9-12, has about 34 benchmarks. U.S. history and world history have about double the number because they tend to be year-long courses. Requiring civics instructions to stand on its own in a civics course also sends a message to students that their role in America's representative democracy is essential, and that the need to master the civics content and build the civic skills needed to be effective in civic life. A little bit on the test. One common criticism of the civics test is that it's simplistic and does not reflect the knowledge required to be an effective citizen. While in many ways I have agreed with this over time, when we compared the civics test questions with the content required in the 34 benchmarks, the benchmarks are much more rigorous and comprehensive. In other words, if students are learning the content in the benchmarks, they should be able to answer the civics test questions. When we hear dismal national poll results showing that people don't know much about government, we like to think that Minnesota students know more. But how do we know? Currently, we don't. Across the country, states are using the citizenship test results to help answer this question. While certainly not perfect, it is one indicator. Current Minnesota law states that students cannot be prevented from graduating because they haven't passed the civics test. This bill helps make certain that when they do graduate, they have had the civic education needed to be effective citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. Please state your name for the record and proceed.
My name is Darren Anderson. I've got two titles. I serve as the chairman of the Litchfield School Board, and I also serve as a social studies teacher in the Wilmer School District. So first I want to just talk real quickly about the importance of civics education. I spoke before this committee 2 years ago, and one of the things that I spoke about was the value of education, the importance of education. This civics bill emphasizes the importance of how government works. One of the questions I ask my students when I teach government is, what do you think about government? They don't know, or if they do know, it was taught early. But the most common response I get, why should I pay attention? This doesn't affect me. That's why it's important to teach juniors and seniors when they become at that age where they can start participating, voting, registering to vote, being aware of the issues. This is the most critical time. A lot of schools teach this, but they teach it at an early age that kids don't pay attention because I don't pay taxes. I don't have to worry about the next election because I can't vote. When I brought in Representative Urdahl to speak, and I brought in also Representative Baker, who is the representative in Wilmer, and they talk about the issues. They talk about why it's important to be involved. And kids get a better understanding when they see it. But I'll tell you a really interesting story. In the 2016 presidential election, I would print out articles that were issues that were faced in the election, and I had the kids understand what the issues were. And I would tell them that this is important to know for two reasons. Number one, this will impact you one day. And number two, you need to know what's going on around you. And when these students got a chance to understand, they became more engaged. They wanted to get involved in politics. They wanted to get involved in campaigns because at the age of juniors and seniors, now they knew. There was an article I also printed out during the election from Arizona, a nationally published article that talked about if you don't like President Trump, at that time candidate Trump, if you don't like Secretary Clinton, don't vote for either one, because if neither one of them get to 270, neither one of them can become president. And we all know that that's not true. But that's the information that's going out there, and these kids don't know. So it's important. A lot of schools, like I said, have this civics class, but they teach it early. A lot of schools can make that shift. Litchfield, for an example, is one school that's doing exactly what Representative Urdahl is asking in this bill. They teach it for juniors and seniors. They also provide 40 electives that juniors and seniors can take. So this is already in place, and other schools can adopt this same mentality and this same idea. A lot of schools, Wilmer, for an example, offers civics at the 10th grade level and geography at the 11th grade level. We can switch those. And speaking as a school board member, our school board in Litchfield had passed a resolution in support of Representative Urdahl's bill. And I would encourage other schools to follow suit because civics is important. I think all subjects are important, but if we don't teach the kids how this process works, I feel I failed as an educator.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. I want to make sure Representative Urdahl has more time for testifiers. That was a little over 2 minutes. Hello. Mr. Justice, please state your name for the record and proceed.
Name is Paul H. Anderson. Used to be on the Supreme Court. More importantly, I used to be a school board member and also is when I was on the court, I was in a classroom 2-3 times a month talking to kids. I've given to Representative Urdahl an article I did for the School Board's Journal about 8 years ago. So I will, that's what my main concern is. But I want to say, I've been taught in my profession to state the issue. The issue here is civic education. What is that? The study of the rights and duties of a citizen. And I've set forth that this right now, we've got a lot of empirical data that shows that this area of our society is suffering from malnutrition and is not good health. Why is that important? You are members of the legislature, but you are not our sovereigns. The people are our sovereigns. Now, we give you a little bit of sovereignty every once in a while, and it's conditional, limited sovereignty. But if the sovereignty comes from the people, then the people should be educated. And here I'm going to quote Thomas Jefferson. Said, if a nation expects to be ignorant and free in a state of civilization, expects what never was and never will be. The health of our very society depends upon what we're talking about here, so that you have educated sovereigns who can work in our society. And the other thing is, how many of you have encountered people that you just can't talk to about politics? I mean, it shuts down. And is that I talk in my article about how we need to teach people how to talk to each other about civic life and civic politics. If we don't do that, our health is going to deteriorate as a society. Finally, as a school board member, I've been there, done that. I know what the decision is. I empathize with the school board and the decision between this and that. I don't sympathize because people on the school board wanted to be there, so they want to make decisions, as do you. But there are times when you have to make really tough, important decisions, and civics education is one of those important decisions. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Justice. Go ahead and state your name for the record and proceed.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My name is Steve Young. I was formerly Dean of the Hamlin Law School, where I had the privilege of supervising Jennifer Bloom on law-related education. I was also an assistant dean at the Harvard Law School. And my ancestors participated in creating something which you all are doing now. My ancestor Winthrop Young, in April 1775, took the association oath to oppose with arms the operation of His Majesty's armies in the North American colonies. And on my mom's side, Lewis Morris signed the Declaration of Independence. And his half-brother, Gouverneur Morris, and Justice Anderson knows more about that ancestor than I do, he wrote the preamble for our Constitution. And I am here to address the point that Representative Urdahl made. What is important? And what I want to say is that our republic is perhaps the most precious thing ever created by humans on this planet. And I do not want it to pass away, weaken, or die on my watch. And we are in difficult times, Madam Chair, and members of the community and fellow citizens. Not since the 1854 and the passage of the Kansas-Nebraska Act has our republic been so divided. And what are we going to do about it? I've also had experience not just in the past, but with new Americans, the 2 million Vietnamese, Khmer, Hmong, Lao, and others who have come here as new Americans. It's because of what I did in March 1975. I am committed to this country. And we have been lackadaisical, Madam Chair, about teaching civics and bringing up people who can talk to each other with respect where they differ. After 1854, the danger was clear. There were people in chains. Today, it is not so clear. The danger is in our hearts. It's in our minds. And that comes from our lack of education. I believe it is the function of the legislature to set expectations, particularly as to the quality of our republic and our civic life. That is important. And you need to do that by setting high standards, high expectations worthy of a great people. And I think you need to do as much as you can to highlight core values and a year-long course in junior year. If other things have to be sacrificed, so be it. Sacrifice them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Representative Urdahl, I believe there are one more person that signed up to testify. I think it's against or neutral, I'm not sure. and then we'll move to questions. But before we do that, while we have most people here, before you all start filtering out, because it's almost 4 o'clock, I just want to say we are meeting at our regular time tomorrow, and then our hearing on Friday is from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. with a half-an-hour lunch in between. We'll see where we're at on the agenda. And then for next week, I wanted you to be aware that we will be meeting Monday, March 4th from 10 to 11:30, and Friday, March 8th from 8:30 to 10. And then we may be adding Tuesday evening, and hopefully not Wednesday evening too, but the intention is to get all our bills heard by the 6th and start drafting the bills. So, yep, we'll send an email. I just wanted to let you know to put it on your radar. We'll send an email. I want to just give people the heads up. Representative Erickson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could we move Friday to 9 o'clock?
I will have to check and see if we have the room at that time. Rooms are getting pretty precious around here, but we can double
Because
check.
we have a lot of bills on the schedule, and they're controversial, so I think there'll be a lot of debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see Mr. Aronson and Ms. Dietrich has joined us at the table. Please state your name for the record and proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Roger Arnson. I represent the secondary principals, and I'm here to just offer a couple of comments on 249. I think that Representative Urdahl has us up to about 60 authors. I wonder where the balance of the legislature is hiding, that he hasn't gotten them yet. A couple things about this, though. One of the concerns that we have, and we deeply appreciate the amendment that he did put on the bill that clarified about the experiential part of this. This is, in a lot of school districts, I think, as you already heard, is going to have the effect of flipping the government classes to 11th and 12th grade rather than being in 9th and 10th. And so we have some lead time, so we'll do that. One of the things, though, there's a little different format here. This actually, in the social studies, we haven't identified any particular classes. And the line says that this must be including credit for a course in government. Always important to say what you mean. So do you mean a full credit? Do you mean a half credit? And we raised this, and here's why we raised this now. I mean, the devil's in the details on this. And so when we get to that second semester of the senior year and the graduation invitations have been purchased, we need to say that that kid's met the requirements, so he's going to graduate. So we need to be clear, because when you're all gone and we're gone, someone from the department may say, well, no, that means a full credit, when we presume that it's a half. And so good if we have at a minimum some legislative history today that confirms what that position is on this. And we appreciate the passion that Representative Urdahl brings to this and to all things Urdahl as we go through this, and that he is a lot of fun to work with, and this is a good cause. Denise has a couple of concerns as well.
Representative Urdahl, let's let the two finish, and then we'll go to
Could I respond directly to Kim first?
I don't want to get into a back and forth.
No, it's real
okay.
quick.
Representative Urdahl, okay, we have about 5 minutes, so, okay, go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. And just, I'm not sure, did you hear me when I was defining the credit earlier? I said credit does not mean one credit. It can mean any percentage up to. So it's whatever you want it to be. Now, I do not want to say that you've gone on record for mandates and against local control, but that's what it might appear to some people.
Mr. Aronson, or Ms. Dietrich, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Denise Dietrich, and I'm here on behalf of the Minnesota School Boards Association. And I, first of all, want to say thank you to Representative Urdahl for offering the amendment that has alleviated many of our concerns. I want to point out two concerns, though, that we still do have with the bill. And the first is on page 3, line 9, where you use the words "an understanding of civic life," and you elevate that into the world's best workforce report and accountability system. And I would contend that local school boards are very much committed to the world's best workforce and achieving the 5 goals that they already have, and that bringing an understanding of civics life into the world's best workforce is a little ambiguous as what that means. How do you measure it? And this is now one of the standards that school boards would be measured on. The other one is, the other concern is on is where Representative Urdahl takes the on page 9 line 11, where we take the civics test scores and we submit them to the department to be reported on the report card. And we think that we would strongly urge this committee to allow ESSA, which was newly implemented, 2 years of work, stakeholders, the department has gone, 2 years of work has gone into that, and to just let the new plan marinate and let school districts get used to it without adding the civics test scores to the statewide accountability system in the state. So those are our two concerns. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Representative Urdahl.
Representative
thank you.
Urdahl, follow up, and then we'll go to member questions.
Thank you, Ms. Dietrich. And, you know, we're making progress here over the years. First of all, you know, the things that are in the world's best workforce. I mean, I don't know how you measure any, you'll measure this the same way you do the other ones. I don't know that we do a report on each of those items. What was the other thing? Excuse me.
Ms. Dietrich?
The civics test, well, again,
Representative Urdahl?
thank you, Madam Chair. Regarding the civics test, I mean, students are required to take this test. It doesn't, there's no graduation implication or anything like that. All we're asking, and I think it's very reasonable to know how many kids in a school took a test and how many passed. That's all we're asking. Doesn't seem unreasonable. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Dietrich, you have one more follow-up, then we're going to go to member questions.
I do have a follow-up to that, and that is that once we submit civics test scores to the department on the report card, I think that there is an equity issue there from a standpoint of some school districts, we all know, start at certain places, maybe in different populations, different makeup, different all sorts of things, and to start submitting those scores on a test that is not necessarily valid or reliable, and it's not one of our standardized tests aligned to standards. So I think it really does throw a little bit of a monkey wrench into our accountability system. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Urdahl, you
Madam
don't
Chair,
have any time for questions.
Other
Keep
states
this
are
up.
able to
One
do
more
it.
thing.
Other states are able to do what I'm asking.
Thank you, Representative Urdahl. Any member questions? I have Representative Barr on the list.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Urdahl, thanks for bringing this bill forward. A couple of quick points before we get out of here. I know everybody wants to go play in the snow. First, there was a recent poll in the Wall Street Journal where it showed 45 adults the age 45 or less, only 19% of them could get a passing grade in the test that we give new immigrants. 19% of adults 45 and younger, and a passing score was 50%. That ought to be enough right there to say that this is something that we need to get back into our schools and need to teach. And the second point I'd like to bring up is your testifiers, the group of them as a whole, demonstrated just how badly we need the civics class put into our high schools. As someone who recently learned a lesson in being very careful with your words, and that words have a very specific meaning, you had two of your testifiers use the word democracy. You had one of your testifiers referred to us as a republic, and another one talked about us as being sovereigns. We're a constitutional republic. The citizens are sovereign, and we are not a democracy. And your testifiers brought that out very clearly, that there is a distinct difference between a democracy and a republic, and we have obviously not taught that lately.
Thank you, Representative Barr. Representative Bierman.
Representative Urdahl, thank you very much for bringing this bill forward, and your testifiers were great. I believe that all the details can get worked out in the curriculum, and we really need to do this and get civics engagement back in our schools. I really appreciated one of your earlier testifiers who said it best. I thought civic literacy is the key to transform knowledge to engagement. Engagement is what we need. So I commend you for that. And I think it's important to do it as soon as possible because our very form of government, I think, is on the line. And I appreciate all your testifiers. They were fabulous. I enjoyed it very much. And thanks for bringing it forward.
Thank you. Well, I think I'm going to give you the final word. I don't see any more people on the list. And final word, Representative Urdahl.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to present this. It certainly is very, very important, and we need to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Urdahl. I renew my motion to lay House File 249 over for possible inclusion. As amended, oh, thank you, Representative Erickson. I renew my motion to lay House File 249 as amended over for possible inclusion in the omnibus bill. And with that, tomorrow we'll see you same time, same place, 2:30. We're adjourned.
Thank you.